Hello Aqua Clan, welcome to April's video. I have a beautiful cluster of pink flowers. It's very springy. This would make a fantastic card to give to your mother for Mother's Day or even as a painting itself. I just love this reference photo of these flowers. I do love this bokeh background that it has. I decided to simplify the flower clusters by using an angular brush and a triangle brush for the leaves. And I'm going to quickly go through with you how I go about doing this. So this is the triangular brush. It actually has 3 sides. That's why they call it a triangular brush. You're basically painting with the sides of the brush, not the belly, and it produces wonderful leaves. And then of course the chisel brush. I'm going to start off with the chisel brush and I'm going to show you the petals that I make using this. You're going to start with the tip down and you drag it and then you pull up, and you can keep going over the same petal to make it as big or as small as you'd like. So if I wanted it smaller, I would just do the 1 stroke. If I want it larger, I'll go over it a few times. And notice that rotating your painting helps you paint in the direction that you're most comfortable in. So you will see me doing that quite often, is rotating my paper. As a warm-up exercise, I actually practice these petals before I go right into the real painting. If it's been a while, because I don't use this brush that often. But you could just practice rows and rows of little petals like that, and sort of brings you into a warm-up mode. Now some flowers I do want on an angle, and so I'll vary the shapes of the petal. You can turn your brush around and make it more round. So some flowers will be facing left or right, some will be head on, and I'm just showing you the various types of positions that I'm using my brush in to make those different types of flowers. And you know what? You could play around with this and maybe even come up with your own shape, just whatever you feel comfortable with. So rotating the paper is really important. It does help get eye-hand coordination just perfect so that you can create your flower. Now I'll show you the triangular brush. I'm using sap green and shadow green. So you're basically using the sides of the triangular brush, not the belly of the brush. So the sides is what's going to give you some really nice leaf shapes. And it has such a fine point that you can make really skinny leaves. Or if you want a thicker leaf, then you are just going to pull down more. And that gives you that thickness, okay? So depending on what shape you want your leaf to be, pull down more, I get a thicker leaf. So I would also suggest practicing with the brush. You could also use your chisel brush to make leaves as well. You don't need 2 different brushes. I just like how the triangular brush has such a fine point. So I do love using this one for leaves. All right, so let's start on making our real project. The first thing I want is a dreamy background. So I am going to work wet on wet, and I'm just taking a 1.5 inch flat brush to wet the background of my paper. And then the colors I decided to use are the Opera Rose. This is a very strong pigment. I liked to mix in some cobalt blue. This is very, very strong, so I'm adding more water. And when I add the water, I like to rotate my paper, and since everything's wet, it's just going to be very blurry. Now this is a very bright green. It's almost too bright. I had to dampen that color down a little bit. This is called gold green, and it's absolutely beautiful. Pretty much working with these very bright colors as my background, but it is wet on wet, and so I'm rotating my paper and letting things blend together and move around on the paper. A little bit of quinacridone red in the mix. I am adding it to my green to get that a little bit less bright. And when you tilt your paper and you just kind of let all the colors bleed in together, that's when wonderful things happen, because the colors are mixing on the paper and you get some beautiful transitions. So while it's still wet, I'm just taking a round sponge dopper and just pulling up those bokeh light effects. A lot of the times, because my paper is so saturated, I'm going to have to go over those same areas a few times in order to make the impression stick and get defined edges. And each time I'm daubing off the moisture on a piece of paper towel. And you could do as many circles as you want. If you don't have a sponge dauber, you could also use a round stencil and pull up some of the paint off once it's dry. Adding a few sprinkles of water as well, just to have more atmosphere in my background, and you are going to let that dry or dry it. Now for my second layer, I do want that effect that I see in the reference photo where some petals are out of focus, and so I decided to re-wet with some clean water and just have a very light effect of some petals. I could also use a spray bottle to make the paint move around more. Where I see that there's a lot of pigment in the reference photo, I'm adding more pigment on my paper. But I did spritz it with water and use that brush, and so the edges are soft. If ever you want to soften up some edges, you just have to spray it with your spray bottle like I just did. Adding some quinacridone red there to that really bright green spot, as it's a little bright. Bringing in some of my shadow green with my sap green. Keeping an eye on your reference photo wherever I see some blurry green spots, some foliage, I'm just sort of adding that in. Or wherever you want to put these colors to balance out your composition. Toning down that pink blob I have there with some green. So once you're happy with the amount of texture that you have on this second layer, we're going to let that whole thing dry, or you could dry it. Now the third layer is our final layer, and that is when I am using my chisel brush again here to make the petals of these blossoms. Now you can use a regular round brush too to make your petals. Whatever you have on hand will work. You will just do the same sort of strokes. Making one on an angle. Now this is the cluster of all the blossoms in the middle of the page here, and I'm just trying to put in a whole bunch of petals to represent these flower clusters. And you could turn around your paper as you see fit in order to be able to paint in the direction that you're most comfortable in. And I'm going right over top of some of the ones that I did that are blurry. They have this see-through, very soft effect, and I kind of like it. It kind of reminds me of like a stained glass look. I'm not going for realism. I'm just going for a very fun, fresh look. Just very whimsical. Now I'm coming in with a script liner brush just to add in the stems of the flowers. And sorry about my big head getting in the way. Using the triangular brush to add in my leaves. Sorry, my head's getting in the way, guys. So you can see that I'm turning my paper as I need to in order to get these leaves in. So you can make as many leaves as you'd like for your composition, and then you're going to dry that or let it dry. The last final step is adding the gold accent. So this is just a gold pen that I have. It's very nice and sparkly, and I'm just adding in some centers to the flowers here. It's really hard to tell on camera, but when you look at the picture from an angle, it does give it a really nice sparkle. Picking up my gold paint, I'm going to paint in some gold bokeh lights here, or bouquet lights. I always say it wrong. I think it's pronounced bouquet, but I'm so used to saying bokeh, that's how I say it, sorry. So putting that in, like I said, it's really hard to tell how pretty this actually is because the video doesn't pick up that sparkle, except for the gray hairs on my head, of course. So yeah, add as many little gold accents as you want. I didn't want to overdo it, so I'm just adding a few here. I think I went with four or five. Now, if you want to put a gold accent kind of where you already had it, you're going to have to dry it so your stencil does not smear it. So in between, I had to dry it a few times here. And then putting in one behind some flower petals I thought would be cute and give it extra depth. So pretty much stopped here thinking that I had enough gold accents to balance out my composition. And now I'm taking off the tape. Now, just to let you know, a quick tip here, when I took off that last one, there was a little bit of paint that bled underneath. If you take a magic eraser, you could pretty much get that right off. Now, I'm rotating the paper here. As you can see, that beautiful sparkle. It's just such a fun project. Look at how whimsical that is. And the little centers of the flowers sparkle. Thanks for watching. See you guys next month.